If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Hey, warmer for the blow! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Easton Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Blake Lovell, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him a lot about the SEC's NBA draft decisions, some of the guys that they decided to come back to school and were in the transfer portal. We just saw PJ Haggerty come off the board. We saw that with Darion Williams as well, so we're going to be discussing that and so much more. And then in the final segment, we're going to get you guys a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larsium, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while we did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is indeed powered by EdgeBoost. Over at EdgeBoost, they make sure that bettors are able to access their funds 24/7, 365 in leap years, 366 days out of the year. They make sure that all of your gambling funds, all of your gambling transactions approved every single time. And when you go to EdgeBoost.bet, utilize that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's talk with the man, the myth, the legend of Blake Lovell, as he does such amazing work over at Southeastern 16. Also, the Clutch Point Sports app. You're able to follow my Twitter/X at the Blake Lovell. Last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, I mean, it is a wild time of year. We've got a lot of NBA draft decisions that are hanging in the balance, and I'm not sure you've taken a look at these last few days, but I really feel like the SEC have been big winners in all of this. The lone real loser, I think, is Duke, losing out on the fact that they're not going to be getting Cedric Cowher, but pretty much all the questionable guys out there in the SEC have decided to return, and in the case of Boogie Flan, staying within the SEC, even though he entered in the transfer portal.
Yeah, like you said, we talk about sort of just knowing this is a conference every year where you're going to have a lot of these big decisions that are going to be made. And of course, as we've always said too, you know, the NIL era has changed that because the SEC has no problem dishing out money at a lot of these places to be able to sort of lure some of these guys back that may be, you know, kind of those early second round type picks or something like that, somewhere in that range. And so, yeah, I mean, we're certainly seeing some of these when it comes to what seems like some positive momentum or already some decisions that have been made with guys who are going to come back to school. And then, like you mentioned, you know, getting a Boogie Flan making a big decision like that, the way that he did, not just to return to college, but to go from Arkansas to Florida, who, you know, should be, depending on what happens with Alex Condon, probably the favorite in the SEC and maybe the favorite nationally when all is said and done when it comes to some of these picks that are still, or sort of just decisions that are still waiting out there for these potential draft picks.
Yep, and out of all the decisions I think have gone down, I still think one of the biggest one is Joshua Hubbard going on over to Mississippi State, deciding to stick that out, because I feel like the difference between him staying at Mississippi State versus him staying in the draft, I felt like might have been one of the most significant for any team out there, because I just think that the level of play at Mississippi State just simply would not have been the same if he would have left.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's been the guy the past, you know, couple of years. There's just not been another guy on that team like him. You know, even when you had Tolu Smith there in the front court, like he wasn't Hubbard. And I think it's just such a different sort of dynamic that he brings to the table. You know, I think it's pretty clear that if you're picking an SEC Player of the Year type candidate going into next season, like I said, depending on maybe a couple of these draft decisions may still have something to do with that. But I don't think there's any doubt that if you're putting together a very short list of, let's say, 5 players that are going to be on the SEC Player of the Year kind of ballot heading into next season, he's easily one of the 5. And I don't think there's any way you could leave him off that list. I think in some instances you could even say that maybe he's the favorite just based on the numbers he's going to put up, right? Because if we look at guys elsewhere, you know, even you could even take a Boogie Flan, you could take a Tommy Houck, Florida, you take guys like that and say, all right, they're going to put up good numbers on probably one of the better teams, so they wind up being the Player of the Year. Well, that's where Florida has so many different options. Kentucky may be kind of the same way. If I take Oweh comes back and those kind of things, he should certainly be a guy that's going to be figured into that discussion. Even a Mark Mitchell at Missouri, guys like that. But I'm like, you look at Hubbard, I don't know how he's not on that top list just based on all the contributions this guy's already made, in a couple of seasons at Mississippi State, averaging at least 17 points per game his first 2 seasons. And now, being able to come out and likely put up the kind of numbers he's going to put up next season on a team that, I think is still kind of hard to figure out overall. They've certainly had some nice pickups, I think, in the transfer portal. But what Chris Jans, I feel like, has done, he's kind of had teams that have looked a little bit different each year, not just from a personnel standpoint. They've not been afraid to kind of tweak their style a little bit just to be able to fit it into the guys that they're bringing in. So Mississippi State's kind of one of those teams I don't have a great feel on, but what I do know is that Josh Hubbard will be one of the best players in the SEC next season.
Yep, no question about it. I do love what Josh Hubbard is able to bring to the table, and I thought that was so massive that he decided to head back to school. Joining me on the show, we do have Blake Lovell, who does great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. Now, I think the biggest team of question mark right now is Arkansas, because they've got multiple guys that have NBA draft decisions, and this is an Arkansas team that it feels like they're sort of in no man's land. They've been able to do an okay job in the transfer portal, but I can tell that there's maybe a spot or two that they're looking to fill right now, and they're holding out hope that guys like Knox and company are going to be coming back to school. How do you take a look at this Arkansas team? Because I do think that they're the team that right now has the most to gain/lose over the next few days.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I mentioned Oweh, Kentucky, sure, if he doesn't come back, Kentucky loses an SEC Player of the Year guy. But you look at all the numbers on that roster and you're saying, yes, you're losing, maybe your top player without question, but look at all the guys that are on that roster. Well, with Arkansas, the difference is that Kentucky's got a lot more of these kind of type experienced guys in these kind of, starting type spots. Whereas with Arkansas, you're bringing in, a couple freshmen that are going to have to play. You've got multiple sophomores. You mentioned Carter Knox, Billy Richmond's back there. And yes, you've still got some of the older guys, like bringing in a Malik Ewan was significant, Nick Pringle as well. You've got some of these older guys in the front court, but specifically, when you talk about the guys who are going to be handling the ball the most, these are newer guys. Even as talented as they are, if you get a Carter Knox who decides that he's going to stay in the NBA draft, then I think that's significant because, again, if we are kind of, coming up with some of those guys, I said, a couple of weeks ago, I'm like, Carter Knox to me is a type player who could very well kind of, put himself in a position where he has a chance to win an SEC Player of the Year type award next year, because I just think he's that good. And if you look at the way he finished last season, I mean, this guy was playing as well as anybody out there. I mean, the production is undeniable. And so I think he has a chance to take a huge jump from freshman to sophomore. Same with Billy Richmond. But it is a team, numbers wise. Like I said, you're not really necessarily comparing them to a Kentucky, to a Florida right now in terms of just the sheer numbers on this roster. And so if you take him out of the mix, then things get a little bit more interesting, even for a team that is very talented. Honestly, right now, I think if you had to order the SEC's top sort of, 3 teams, it probably, to me, would be Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, in whatever kind of order you decide to put them in. But a lot of that really is dependent on these, big draft decisions with Oweh, with Knox, and with Alex Condon, because, one way or the other could significantly kind of, move one of those teams in a different direction.
No question about it. I think that these are going to be very interesting to watch, and I think that there's a lot to be gained/lost here in the next few days, as we do have Blake Lovell, who does great work over at Southeastern 16, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that the Alex Condon decision, to your point, is very big, because we know that Ruben Chinyelu is going to be going back to school, and I thought that that was massive for them. And for Florida, even though they are going to be in transition in the backcourt, being able to bring in Boogie Flan, that alleviates that. And if they get back Alex Condon, I think that this becomes all of a sudden a super duper dangerous team to be able to repeat, because you've got back your entire front court, and then you could bring back a guy in Boogie Flan who, as a freshman, he was able to average 14 plus points per game in this conference.
Yeah, and I mean, look, let's be honest too. As good as the backcourt was last year, and it's not taking anything away from Walter Clayton and Elijah Martin and Will Richard and those guys, because there's no way you can. I mean, they don't win a national championship without that trio. But at the same time, I think they only reached the level that they reached in terms of the way they were beating teams and being able to kind of do some of the things they were doing because of their front court, because of really just doing the little things, right? The dirty work from the front court, I think, is what helped them win a national championship, because, that goes into interior defense, that goes into rebounding, blocking shots, and those things like that. And I mean, just look at, like you said, the possibility of a team that gets its top 4 front court players back on a national championship team. I mean, that's just not something we see very often in this era. And so if they're able to get Condon back, if he returns to school, Chenyalu, like you said, he's back. Micah Henlogden's back. Thomas Houck, again, who kind of emerged into the it guy on that team, and he'll be an SEC Player of the Year candidate, just like Woogie Flan, just like Alex Condon probably, if he returns. And so if you're looking at a team like that, all of a sudden you're looking at a team, and this is another discussion I feel like we had a week or two ago. I mean, they have possibly 4 or 5 NBA draft picks in their top 7, of their rotation. And again, how many teams in college basketball are going to be able to say that next season when you really look at the roster that they have? And this is not even, think about this too. We're focusing all on the guys that are returning that already have kind of proven production. I mean, look at the young guys that Todd Golden is bringing in, like CJ Ingram, not getting talked about a lot, but he is very, very talented. Like, look at AJ Brown, Isaiah Brown, Alex Lloyd, like all these guys. I mean, these are players that are going to make a big impact, I think, on this Florida team. And it's just one of the reasons why, if they get Condon back, I just feel like, in my opinion, that they are absolutely going to be the team to beat. And not just in the SEC. I think they're probably the favorite to win the national championship, because you just look at the makeup of the roster. They have a proven front court, literally 2 deep at every position, and just being able to play different rotations and all that, especially with the young talent they have. It's just hard not to look at Florida if Condon comes back and think that they're not the team to beat.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I am incredibly impressed by what we've seen out of Florida this offseason with all that they've got, and it's seeming like they should be getting Condon back as well as of right now, but we shall see what is going to be happening on that front in the next few days, as Blake Lovell, who does great work over at Southeastern 16, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, and we've talked all about positivity, and this goes beyond the SEC. This is just nationally, but has there been any losers that have stood out to you over the last few days? Because I mentioned it with Duke, it does feel like having Cedric Howard leave them and saying the NBA draft, that's a little bit rough, but are there any other teams out there where you say, man, maybe they did get a little bit of the short end of the stick here in this process?
I feel like it was, to me, Greg, some of the teams that were just waiting to figure out what PJ Haggerty was going to do. I feel like he was one, remember, and this is why I just find it so fascinating, because we can think back to the multiple conversations we've already had this offseason, and the teams that we were just debating, like, all right, this guy's definitely going to this team or that team. But it's what we always say. It's the domino effect, where you just have kind of the way things always fall, to where, you have just teams that are just kind of, all right, maybe a month ago, you're sitting there looking at them in this spot. Well, and then eventually you're like, well, they're not even on the list, right? And they're not even someone who maybe is considered for this guy. But that's just how it works. And I think that's where, obviously he winds up at Kansas State. And we kind of know the way that the dominoes fell. I mean, look at the roster that NC State has put together under Will Wade and all those other things. But like, I think back to some of those initial teams that were mentioned for someone like PJ Haggerty. And I'm like, you just never know where the domino effect can take you. And that's where, I mean, I look up and to me, it's not even just him, right? I feel like it's the teams that you kind of hear that are always kind of in that spot where, all right, it's that trickle down effect where a guy winds up here, and how does that impact these other decisions that have to be made? Because like we said a minute ago, if some of these guys don't come back to school from the Floridas and the Arkansas, Kentuckys and all that, well, all of a sudden, that domino effect continues. And so I think when you kind of look at it from that standpoint, which I know it's really, I guess you could say Memphis initially to lose him was probably a team in there that found itself in that position of being in the losing category. But just based on the fact that you kind of look at the way that this whole thing played out with him, it's kind of the same kind of process, I feel like, when it comes to other top players. And so it's maybe hard to pinpoint just one particular team, because again, it's not like we're going to call NC State a loser based on the roster they put together just because they didn't add him to the mix, because we know they've already made some other moves that are fine enough to be able to probably put them in contention for an ACC title next season under Will Wade. But I think overall, it's just the full picture you look at and kind of realize that, man, this is something where when you have a Darian Williams be able to go to NC State, that sends Haggerty to Kansas State, and the way these things play out, such a fascinating process. And again, we're still not finished here when it comes to the transfer portal. We know that there are still going to be these kind of moves that are made to see things how they kind of play out from here.
Yep, no question about it, because we also have coaching moves that are happening as well, with like North Florida losing their coach a few days ago. So those guys enter the transfer portal. It's just never, ever done. And Blake, I'm so glad you mentioned the fact that Darian Williams is heading on over to NC State. Have they perhaps had the most powerful offseason of any team in college basketball? Because you pick up Will Wade, you pick up Williams, you pick up all these guys, and I know that there's a lot of schools that made some nice moves here in the offseason. I can't think of a single program that has revamped and reloaded more than NC State, because it's really all-encompassing.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think when you just consider not just maybe who they brought in, it's just the timeline of everything. And I think just being able to build a roster as quickly as they have in terms of, again, just kind of getting the guys and, yes, going back to kind of knowing Will Wade during his days at LSU. Everybody can say, what they want about how things ended there at LSU. And then he goes to McNeese and he just wins. Like, that's kind of what it always comes back to. Like, Will Wade is going to win college basketball games. He's going to win. I think it's just when you see the ability to put together the roster, I think he's a very good basketball coach. And I think, again, that's kind of something that probably gets undervalued a bit, just based on, again, maybe the career trajectory for him and the ups and downs along the way. But when you consider, again, what they've done here, knowing that whenever they went out and hired Will Wade, they were going to put the resources into it. You don't make that hire and then just come out and not give him the incentives available to be able to put together a roster like this, to go out and know too, Greg. I mean, this is the time. If you're going to have a chance to, make your jump up in the ACC, now's the time, because of everything we talked about last year, about how the conference had simply just fallen off to where, we were talking about the SEC dominating the SEC, or in the ACC, and the challenge that they had. We were talking about, the just lack of success for the ACC teams last year. And so this is kind of your opportunity to make a big move very quickly. And I feel like NC State has done that. And like I said, to me, it all goes back to the head coach, because he's won everywhere he's been. I feel like the way he's put together this roster, the Williams addition, I mean, look at all the other guys that he's brought in, right? I feel like that was just sort of the cherry on top. And now he is going to be kind of the catalyst for what they're going to be able to do next season. And I would fully expect NC State to be right there in that mix in terms of one of the top teams out there. And also probably, one of the top teams in terms of just the overall reconstruction of their roster.
Yep, no question about it. And it's in an ACC where I feel like the coaching moves have been great this offseason, where last few off seasons they really lost a lot of guys that they were just such stalwarts in general. They really needed to be able to bring in some new coaches to be able to breathe some life into that conference. And I feel like they did so this offseason. And we needed a little bit of life on this podcast today, Blake. You were able to provide that. You do such an amazing job taking a look at this great game of college basketball. So love to get people at home know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, I always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, you can find our SEC stuff, Southeastern 16 on YouTube. Still lots of off-season stuff going up, looking at all these transfer portal moves. You mentioned Boogie Fland and others looking ahead to 25-26. So follow me there for all the SEC stuff and everything else college basketball related. Follow me on Twitter /X at the Blake Lovell.
Absolutely. Blake does an amazing job taking a look at this excellent game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Cusco Soup, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And coming up next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes we saw in college basketball on Monday.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Here, lovely Las Vegas, for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Blake Lovell. It does such great work over here at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins me, lends such great insights, and did so once again today. So big thanks to him for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you a recap of the news and notes that we saw in college basketball over the last 24 hours. Hopefully I say this correct. Montes Kakunas. He was over at FAU last season. He has decided that he is going to be going to California. He did not play last season over at Florida Atlantic, but he's a 6'11" center. He was playing for the Lithuanian national team over on the FIBA Under 18 2023 World Cup team, so a little bit of guy with international flair. He's able to pop it from three a little bit, not someone that you're probably going to be looking to and thinking that he is going to be like some sort of a super duper dynamo scorer or anything like that, but that said, this is someone that can be able to add something down low. It's a Cal team that they were really struggling just in all facets of basketball. They need a little bit more defense, and I do think that this is going to be a good pickup for them. And for Cal, I can give them credit over the last few seasons. They've been trying to be able to just mix and match in general. I felt like they did a really good job in terms of coaching search a few seasons ago to be able to bring in.
If a game is listed on the betting board, Greg has a side and a total on it, so it is time to touch them all.
Mark Manson, who I think is going to be able to turn around this program, just is going to take some time because, man, the level of stink that they had prior to him coming was pretty big. They're bringing in Chris Bell, a nice scorer from Syracuse, Day-Day Ames from Virginia, John Camden, who is the top scorer over at Delaware this past season. So you've got some rock-solid players that are going to be coming in there, and I do think that things are going to be getting turned around sooner rather than later for California. PJ Haggerty is committed to Kansas State. This is massive for them, as it was looking like Haggerty was going to go to NC State. He had an NBA draft decision to make. He decided that he is going to be coming back to school, and this guy was tremendous. 21.5 points, 5.8 boards, 3.5 assists, 1.8 steals per contest. Now, here's the thing with Kansas State. Are they actually going to be able to get him to play to the fullest of his potential? Because we've seen it the last 2 seasons. They have done a nice job of being able to bring in pieces via the transfer portal, and last 2 years, it's been a big giant flop. Like last year with trying to balance Doug McDaniel, Coleman Hawkins and company, that completely backfired. And I mean, other than Haggerty, you're bringing in mostly mid-major guys. Like Nate Johnson was solid over at Akron. Abdi Bashir, top scorer over at Monmouth. I like the fact that they brought in Marcus Johnson as well, but you'll also know with Kansas State, they're typically bringing in these guys in the transfer portal late. So while these teams have had April into May to be able to gain some chemistry, these guys like Johnson and company, they are just now coming into the fold. So that's something that you do want to note, but still an absolutely big ad there. Quincy Allen, he was over at Chicago State. He has decided that he is going to be going to Bryant. This is a former top 150 recruit, 6'8", little bit of a combo guy. Began his career over at Colorado, spent a lot of years injured. He's averaging about 9 points, 5 boards, a block per contest. He's able to shoot it a little bit from three, but he's not going to be like some 3-point dynamo scorer or anything like that. But I mean, him going on over there, that's a pretty rock solid ad for Bryant. Obviously, it's a little bit of a tumultuous off-season for them because they did have to replace their coach in Phil Martelli Jr. Things are in a little bit of transition there. With the way that they've been able to angle things, it seems like they're going to have a relatively similar system to what they did 8 seasons ago. Probably going to be looking to run it and gun it a little bit more with Allen. He did play in a little bit more of an up-tempo system last season. And for Bryant, a little bit slow going in the transfer portal. They also added Keegan Harvey from George Washington, so we'll see what other moves they've got up their sleeve. And this team has a nice move up their sleeve as Ben Izegu. He was over at Appalachian State last season. He's going on over to Southern Indiana. He had 6'7", was only able to put up about 3 points, 2 rebounds per game, was just very limited this last season in general due to injury. So we're going to see how he's going to be able to bounce back because he was someone that came in with a little bit of upside. And I do think that with his size, right around about 6'7", 210, he's going to be able to give this team a bit of something down low. Southern Indiana was very lackluster on the post last season, so this is a good pickup for them. This is a good pickup as well. Cam Denson, he last season was over at Long Beach State. He's decided that he is going to be going to Ball State, and this is someone that also spent some time at Pacific last year. He was putting up about 5 points, a little bit over 3 rebounds per contest for Ball State. This team has been very good with their 3-point shooting, not necessarily so good on the defensive side of things. And for Denson, 6'7", shot 35.5% from 3-point range, relatively good floor spacing there. So I think that he's going to be able to step in and he's going to be able to give this team a little bit of a spark. And then you've got Peyton Conaway deciding that he is going to withdraw from the NBA draft, and he is indeed going to be heading on over to Indiana. For Indiana, obviously going to be a new look team this season, and feels like they're finally going to be able to have some balance after the last few seasons. It was all about what they were able to get in the post and absolutely nothing else. Conaway, he last season was over at Troy, 14 points, 4.5 boards, 4.5 assists, one of the better just guys in terms of generating steals in all of college basketball as well. They're going to be looking to play that DeVries system, and I think that he's going to be able to fit very well. And what else fits well is the fact that every single day I'm looking at this great game of college basketball. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we offer those in. First one is my my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter. So, per usual, please do send these into the timeline. Other ways, find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire on whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Big thanks once again to Blake Lovell of Southeastern 16 for joining me in my segment. Coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. So I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.